Hello there! In the previous episode, we set up the game objects for turret and projectile. In this episode, we will make the turret complete and in the process learn how to create new game objects into the scene with code. Let's continue then. Create a new script, name it as turret and attach it to the game object. When you're done, open the script. Before we start writing, we need to plan a bit. What we need this turret to do is to shoot the projectiles with a steady rate of fire. Also, the turret is currently facing only to right, but we want to create left-facing turrets too. All these things we will solve with code. Let's start by defining few variables. First one will control the rate of fire. Write public float fire frequency equals to 3f. You can later adjust the value according to your needs. Second one will keep track of time. Write private float fire timer. Third one will define the speed of the projectile. Write public float projectile speed equals to 5f. Fourth one will be a boolean that we can use to flip the turret. Write public bool facing left. Fifth one will store the projectile game object. Write public game object projectile. And the last one will store the coordinates where the projectiles will be created. Write public transform projectile spawn. Let's start with the mechanics then. In start function, we need to flip the turret if facing left is true. Write if facing left and inside of the curly brackets, transform dot local scale equals to new vector 3 parenthesis transform dot local scale dot x multiplied by -1 1f 1f. This will do the flipping automatically and we don't need to do it by hand. Then change the update to fixed update. Next we will start our timer. Write fire timer plus equals to time dot delta time. And under it we will write a new variable. Write game object projectile clone. We will store the created projectile into this variable so that we can manipulate it later. Note that the variable only works inside of fixed update because it is declared there. Then we can start to assemble the shooting mechanism. We want this turret to shoot only when the timer's value exceeds the fire frequency. In this case, every 3 seconds. Write if fire time is greater than fire frequency. Next, we want to reset the timer back to 0. Write fire timer equals to 0f. Now the timer will be resetted each time its value gets higher than the fire frequencies. Next, we will create the projectile. We will use a command called Instantiate for that. Write projectile clone equals to Instantiate in parentheses. Then, in parentheses, we need to define what object we want to create, in which position, and with which rotation. We want to create the projectile, which we have as a variable. Write projectile and comma. Next, the position. We want the position of the empty game object we created for that purpose. Write projectile spawn dot position and comma. Lastly, the rotation. For this we will use the empty game object's rotation. write projectile spawn dot rotation. Last thing to do is to take care of the rotation and speed of the projectile. If the turret is facing left, we need to flip the projectile as well and change its speed. So, write if facing left. Then, inside of the curly brackets, projectile clone dot transform dot local scale equals to new vector 3 minus 1f, comma 1f, comma 1f. This will flip the projectile so that it faces left. Next, we will define the speed. Write projectile clone dot get component rigid body 2D dot velocity equals to transform dot right multiplied by minus projectile speed. And finally else, curly brackets and inside of them the same sentence as above, but with positive projectile speed. Transform dot right is a vector that goes along x-axis to the positive direction. To make the projectile fly towards left, we need to invert the vector, which is done by multiplying it with a negative value. One last thing we need to do in code is to add an effect to the player. Switch to the player script. We need onCollisionEnter2D function to detect the hit with the projectile, because its collider is not set as trigger. Write void onCollisionEnter2D, collision2D other. And inside of it, if other dot gameObject dot tag projectile. Then copy the 3 lines of code from the case of enemy above. Awesome! This is all the code we need. Save the script and return to Unity. Before testing, select the turret game object. There are 2 variables that need to be given something to store. Let's start with projectile. Drag the projectile prefab from the project view to the variable slot. Make sure you drag it from the prefabs folder, not from the scene. If you have a projectile in your scene, delete it. Then it's time for the coordinates. Drag the turret's child object into the variable slot. Finally, apply the changes to the prefab. Next, duplicate the turret and move it to the other side of the stone block. Remember to enable the facing left option. This turret will be flipped when we enter into play mode. But before that, duplicate the stone block and move it to the left. We will use it to destroy the projectiles so that they don't fly into eternity. Duplicate it again and move it to the right side. Alright, now we can test this. Make sure that the projectile prefab has the projectile script attached to it. Then activate play mode. The turret gets flipped properly. The projectiles fly to the right directions and get destroyed on collision. Also, we get the game over when the player hits them. Fantastic! Now we have learned to create a shooting turret. In the next episode, we will create moving platforms or elevators. Remember to save the scene. See you later.